I watched through the one-way glass as federal marshals placed handcuffs on my sister's wrists. The metal clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire FBI field office. Vicky's face, usually so confident and radiant, had gone pale. Her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled. Her perfectly styled hair was falling out of its updo. She looked small, broken, nothing like the golden child who'd spent 35 years convincing everyone she was untouchable. My supervisor stood beside me, arms crossed. "You sure you want to watch this?" "Vance." I didn't take my eyes off the glass. "I need to. Because 12 hours ago, I'd done something unthinkable. I'd signed the arrest warrant. For my own sister. For crimes she committed against me. And the worst part. The part that made my hands shake and my stomach turn, I'd do it again. In a heartbeat." You're probably wondering what kind of person reports their own sister to the FBI. What kind of monster chooses a career over family? What kind of cold-hearted agent puts their own blood in federal prison? Let me stop you right there. Because that's exactly what they want you to think. That's exactly what she counted on. That I'd be too weak, too guilty, too desperate for family approval to ever fight back. She was wrong. My name is Alexandra Vance. I'm a senior special agent in the FBI Financial Crimes Division. And over the next hour, I'm going to tell you the story of how the invisible daughter became the prosecutor, how the family doormat became a federal agent, how the girl who always came second finally put herself first. But before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me this. Have you ever been so invisible in your own family that someone thought they could commit a federal crime using your identity and get away with it? Because that's where this story starts. And trust me, where it ends is going to blow your mind. The woman being led away in handcuffs right now. She stole $90,000 using my name. She ruined my credit. She lied to federal institutions. She bragged about it over Easter dinner. And she thought I'd never have the courage to stop her. She thought wrong. So buckle up, because I'm about to tell you how a boring government paper pusher took down a career criminal who just happened to share her DNA, how a quiet, responsible daughter finally made some noise, and how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't forgiving. It's refusing to forget. Let me take you back to where this really began. Not 12 hours ago when I signed that warrant. Not 3 months ago when I discovered what she'd done. But 32 years ago, in a house with white columns and perfect lawns, where I first learned that being good would never be good enough. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed that being good, being responsible, being the reliable one would eventually earn me the love and respect I craved from my family. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, in a colonial-style house with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. My father, Richard Vance, was a partner at a prestigious law firm. My mother, Elaine, served on 3 charity boards and hosted dinner parties where political careers were made and broken over beef, Wellington, and Cabernet. They were the kind of parents who looked perfect in Christmas card photos, who said all the right things in public, who donated generously to causes that got their names in the society pages. Vicky was born 3 years before me, and from her first breath, she owned every room she entered. Beautiful, charismatic, demanding. She learned early that tears and tantrums could reshape reality to her liking. I came along later, quieter, more thoughtful, content to read in corners, while Vicky commanded center stage. Our parents called her their butterfly, their spark of joy. They called me their steady one, their reliable girl. I was too young to understand that reliability was just another word for forgettable. Growing up, I watched Vicky break rule after rule. She crashed my father's Mercedes at 16. Drunk after a party, he bought her a new BMW the following week. She maxed out her first credit card on a shopping spree in New York. $35,000 of designer clothes and jewelry. My parents paid it off and increased her limit. She dropped out of Georgetown halfway through sophomore year to chase some vague dream of becoming a fashion influencer. They bought her a condo in DuPont Circle and a monthly allowance that exceeded my starting salary at the FBI. Meanwhile, I studied. I graduated summa cum laude from William and Mary with degrees in accounting and criminal justice. I worked 2 jobs through graduate school, earning my master's in forensic accounting. I applied to the FBI, survived the grueling background checks, the physical tests, the psychological evaluations. I started as an analyst, spending long nights in fluorescent-lit rooms, tracing money through labyrinthine corporate structures, finding the threads that unraveled organized crime operations and white-collar criminals. My parents came to my FBI graduation. They arrived late and left early, my mother complaining about the uncomfortable auditorium seats. Vicky didn't come at all. She was in the Hamptons that weekend, posting Instagram photos of herself in a white bikini on a yacht. The caption reading, "Living my best life." That post got 47,000 likes. My graduation photo got 12. Most of them from colleagues I'd only known for 6 months. But I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building something real, something meaningful. While Vicky collected designer bags and shallow friendships, I was making a difference. I was putting criminals behind bars. I was protecting people. Surely that counted for more than likes and follows and carefully curated images of a life that was more performance than substance. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed the pattern. Vicky's lifestyle never matched her income, which was sporadic at best. She'd claimed to be consulting for fashion brands or managing social media for high-end boutiques, but the jobs never seemed to last more than a few months. Yet somehow she always had money. A new Range Rover appeared in her driveway. She moved from the DuPont Circle condo to a penthouse in Georgetown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Potomac. When I asked about it at family dinners, she'd wave her hand dismissively, dropping names of investors and business opportunities that dissolved into vague generalities when I pressed for details. My parents never questioned it. They beamed with pride at her success, her ambition, her ability to manifest the life she wanted. My mother would turn to me with that particular smile that looked kind but felt like acid. "You see, Anna, this is what happens when you take risks. When you put yourself out there, you could learn something from your sister." The irony was suffocating. I was the one taking risks every day, working cases that involved dangerous people, spending long hours tracking money trails that led to drug cartels and human trafficking rings and terrorist financing operations. But because I couldn't post about it on Instagram, because my work was classified and quiet, it might as well not have existed in my family's eyes. The Easter dinner 2 weeks before the confession was typical. I arrived on time, carrying a homemade lemon tart that had taken me 3 hours to perfect. Vicky swept in 90 minutes late, the Hermes Birkin bag on her arm, worth more than my car. She air-kissed our parents, ignored me entirely, and launched into a monologue about her new penthouse, the renovation she was planning, her upcoming trip to Nantucket. "You should see the view," she gushed, her words slightly slurred already. She'd clearly started drinking before she arrived. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original hardwood floors, a kitchen that would make Gordon Ramsay weep with joy. I'm thinking of hiring an interior designer. Maybe that guy from $1 Million Listing. The one with the good hair? My mother clasped her hands together. "That sounds wonderful. Darling, you've worked so hard for this." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. Worked hard. Vicky hadn't worked a full-time job in 5 years. But I said nothing. I carved the lamb. I served the vegetables. I smiled and nodded and played my role as the boring, responsible daughter who lacked Vicky's spark, her vision, her courage to dream big. It was during dessert that Vicky turned her attention to me, her eyes glittering with something I couldn't quite name. Malice, maybe, or perhaps just the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Oh, Annie, are you still doing that government paper-pushing thing? Don't you ever want to actually live a little? I mean, what's the point of having security if you're too boring to enjoy life?" My father chuckled. "Now, Vicky, don't tease your sister. Anna is doing important work." But his tone suggested otherwise. It suggested I was doing necessary work. Thankless work. The kind of work that paid the bills but didn't warrant respect or admiration. The kind of work that was fine for someone with modest ambitions and no desire for greatness. I finished my wine. I helped clear the table. I drove home to my modest apartment in Alexandria, 1 bedroom with a view of a parking lot, and I sat in the dark wondering when I'd stopped fighting for my place in my own family. Wondering when I'd accepted that invisible was all I'd ever be to them. 3 days later, the credit alert came through. I was in my office at the J. Edgar Hoover building, deep into analyzing a complex money laundering case involving cryptocurrency and offshore accounts. My personal phone buzzed. A notification from my credit monitoring service. New credit inquiry, Atlantic Bank. I stared at the screen. I hadn't applied for credit. I hadn't even thought about applying for credit. My mortgage was stable. My car paid off. My credit cards managed responsibly. I logged into my credit monitoring account. My heart beginning a slow, heavy rhythm that I recognized from my work. It was the rhythm that came when you were about to uncover something bad. Something that would change everything. The inquiry was for a personal loan. $90,000. The application had been submitted 2 days ago from an IP address in Georgetown. My Georgetown. The address listed was my address. But the phone number was one I didn't recognize. The stated income was 6 figures higher than my actual salary. I didn't panic. Panic was for civilians. I was a federal agent. I stood up, walked calmly to one of our secure conference rooms, and locked the door behind me. Then I used my FBI credentials to pull my complete credit report. There it was. A personal loan for $90,000. Approved by Atlantic Bank 3 days ago. Funds dispersed to an account I'd never opened. The signature on the digital application was a crude forgery of mine. The kind of forgery that someone who'd seen your signature on birthday cards might produce. Sloppy. Arrogant. Stupid. I pulled the loan application. The stated purpose was home renovation. The stated income was $147,000. My actual salary was $78,000. The employment verification had been marked as completed. But I knew Atlantic Bank's verification process. A phone call to a number listed on the application. A voice confirming employment and income. Easy to fake with a burner phone and a friend willing to lie. I sat in that conference room for 20 minutes, staring at the documents on my laptop screen. My mind wasn't racing. It was working methodically, the way it did when I was building a case. I was already seeing the pattern, already understanding what had happened and why. Vicky needed $90,000. Maybe for the down payment on that penthouse. Maybe to cover debts from her previous spending. She needed it fast. And her credit was probably destroyed from her past behavior. So she used mine. She'd always had access to my personal information. We'd shared a bedroom growing up. She'd helped me move into apartments. She knew my birth date, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, all the security questions that were supposed to protect me, and she probably thought she'd get away with it. After all, I was boring. Steady Anna. I probably wouldn't even notice for months. And when I did, what would I do? Confront her, tell our parents they'd talk me down, convince me to be understanding, to be the bigger person, to remember that family was forever. They'd probably offer to pay me back in installments, make it seem like a misunderstanding rather than a crime. Vicky would cry and apologize and promise to do better. And in a few years it would be a funny story they told at dinner parties. Remember when Vicky borrowed Anna's credit? Oh, she was so silly back then. Except this time, Vicky had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She hadn't borrowed from her little sister, the paper pusher, the government drone. She'd committed federal bank fraud against a senior FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes. She'd forged documents, made false statements to a federally insured financial institution, and conducted wire fraud in the process. Each one of those was a felony. Combined, they carried a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison and $1 million fine. I took screenshots of everything. I saved the documents to an encrypted drive. And then I opened a new case file in our internal investigation system. I classified it at the highest security level, accessible only to me and my direct supervisor. The case number appeared on my screen. Cold and official. Case 2024FC7839. Subject Victoria M. Vance. Crime bank fraud. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Making false statements to a financial institution. I typed a single note in the file. Suspect is subject sibling. Investigation to be conducted with maximum discretion to avoid appearance of personal bias. All evidence will be documented according to federal evidence standards. Then I left the conference room. went back to my desk, and finished my work on the cryptocurrency case. Because that's what you do when you're a professional. You compartmentalize it. You focus. You do the job. That night, I went home and did something I'd never done before. I went through every photo album I owned, every childhood memory, looking for the moment when things went wrong. When had Vicky become a person who could do this? When had our parents become people who would enable it? When had I become someone so invisible that I was considered fair game for exploitation? I found a photo from my 8th birthday party. Vicky was 11, wearing a pink dress and a crown she'd insisted on wearing even though it was my birthday. She was holding my cake, the one my mother had made special for me. Chocolate with raspberry filling. My favorite. In the photo, Vicky was about to blow out the candles. My candles. On my cake. At my party, and in the corner of the photo, you could see me. Small and uncertain. Watching her take what was mine, while everyone else smiled and took pictures. That was the moment. That was when I learned that my role in this family was to be the supporting character in Vicky's story. And I'd played that role for 24 more years. Accepting it. Internalizing it. Believing that if I just kept being good and steady and reliable, eventually they'd see me. But they never would. I understood that now. I was never going to be the daughter they celebrated. I was never going to be the sister Vicky respected. I was a resource to them. Not a person. A source of stability when things got messy. A credit report to exploit when money ran tight. A shoulder to lean on that. Never expected anything in return. I put the photo away. I made myself dinner. Grilled chicken and vegetables. The kind of meal that was practical and boring and exactly what I needed. And I made a decision. I was done being invisible. I was done being used. Vicky wanted to play with fire. She'd just lit herself up with federal law enforcement. And this time, being family wouldn't save her. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my case the way I'd built dozens of cases before. Methodically. Thoroughly. Without emotion clouding my judgment. I pulled Vicky's credit report using my FBI credentials, documenting each step with proper authorization to ensure nothing could be challenged later. Her credit score was in the low 500 seconds. Destroyed by late payments, collections, and multiple maxed-out credit cards. No legitimate bank would have loaned her money for a cup of coffee, let alone $90,000 for a home renovation. I traced the IP address used to submit the fraudulent loan application. It came from a coffee shop, 3 blocks from Vicky's penthouse. The kind of place with expensive lattes and free Wi-Fi. I obtained the security footage from that day through official channels, working with a local FBI field agent who didn't know the connection. There was Vicky, laptop open at a corner table, her face clearly visible on 3 different camera angles as she typed. I pulled her social media accounts. Screenshots of every post from the past 6 months. The Range Rover, the penthouse apartment building, the trips to Martha's Vineyard and Aspen and Palm Beach, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, first-class flights. Each post was time-stamped. Each one showed a lifestyle that required serious money, and when I cross-referenced those dates with her limited income records, which I could access through law enforcement databases, the math didn't work. Nothing close to it. But the most damning evidence came when I did what I should have done years ago. I ran a comprehensive financial background check on my sister. What I found made my blood run cold. Vicky hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been doing this for years. Credit cards opened in her friends' names. Small personal loans from acquaintances that were never repaid. Forged checks from our parents' account, though they'd never reported it because family doesn't press charges. I found 7 other victims over the past 4 years. A former roommate who discovered a credit card in her name, maxed out with $15,000 in charges. A college friend who'd co-signed an apartment lease only to be stuck with 6 months of unpaid rent after Vicky disappeared. A boyfriend who'd loaned her $20,000 for a supposed business venture that never materialized. None of them had reported it officially. Vicky was good at choosing targets who wouldn't fight back, who'd be too embarrassed or conflict-averse to involve law enforcement. She'd gotten away with it for so long because she was beautiful and charming and she knew how to make people feel sorry for her. She'd cry and say she made a mistake. She'd promise to pay it back. She'd say she was going through a hard time. And people would believe her because she was Vicky, the golden child, the one with all the confidence and charisma. Surely she couldn't be a deliberate con artist. Surely this was just immaturity. Poor judgment. The excesses of someone who'd never learned to be responsible, but I knew better. This was systematic. This was calculated. Vicky wasn't making mistakes. She was committing crimes. Over and over. Counting on her victim's reluctance to destroy her life by telling the truth. She'd built her entire existence on fraud, on the exploitation of people who cared about her, and now she'd made the fatal error of targeting someone who had both the ability and the will to hold her accountable. I pulled my colleague Michael Sterling into the case. Mike was a 15-year veteran of the FBI, unflappable and thorough. I told him I'd discovered evidence of ongoing financial fraud, and I needed a second set of eyes to ensure I wasn't missing anything. I gave him the encrypted files with Vicky's identifying information redacted. Just case details and evidence. He worked through it for 3 days. When he called me into a secure conference room, his face was grim. "Alex, this is one of the clearest cases of systematic fraud I've seen. Whoever this person is, they've been running a long-term con, escalating over time. The identity theft charge alone is solid. But combined with the bank fraud, the false statements, the wire fraud when the money was transferred, we're looking at multiple federal felonies. And these other victims, if we can convince them to cooperate, this isn't just one crime. It's a pattern. We could be looking at RICO implications if we can show an ongoing criminal enterprise." I kept my face neutral. "What do you recommend?" "We open an official investigation. We contact the other victims. We get warrants for financial records, phone records, email accounts. We build this case airtight. Then we bring it to the prosecutor. With evidence like this, we could get a grand jury indictment in a matter of weeks." I nodded. "Do it. I want this by the book. I want every piece of evidence documented, every witness statement recorded, every search warrant justified. I don't want any mistakes that could let this person walk." Mike gave me a curious look. "Alex, I've never seen you this intense about a case. This person really got under your skin." "Who?" I met his eyes. "This person has been stealing from innocent people for years and getting away with it because they're charming and they know how to manipulate sympathy. I'm tired of watching criminals win because they're good at playing victims." "Aren't you?" He nodded slowly. Yeah, I am." As he left to begin the official investigation, I sat alone in the conference room. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Dinner this Saturday. Vicky has exciting news to share." I stared at the message. Exciting news. I could imagine what it was. Some new investment opportunity. Some new business venture that would somehow justify all the expensive toys she'd been accumulating. Some new fiction to explain the inexplicable lifestyle. I typed a response. "I'll be there." Because I wanted to see her face when she lied. I wanted to look into my parents' eyes as they believed her, as they praised her, as they once again chose her fantasy over my reality. And I wanted to record every word, every detail, to add to the mountain of evidence that was about to bury her. But then something happened I didn't expect. Something that made me realize Vicky's arrogance had reached pathological levels. The Saturday dinner came. I arrived at my parents' house at 6 p.m., parking my practical Subaru next to Vicky's gleaming Range Rover. I was wearing a navy blazer with an interior pocket, specifically designed to hold the small recording device I'd positioned there. Virginia was a one-party consent state for recordings. As long as one person in the conversation knew they were being recorded, it was legal. I was that one person. I walked into the house. The smell of my mother's famous pot roast filled the air. Classical music played softly from the living room speakers. Everything was exactly as it had been for 32 years. Perfect on the surface. Toxic underneath. My parents greeted me warmly enough, though I could see my mother's slight frown as she took in my outfit. Not fashionable enough for her taste. Not expensive enough. Not Vicky enough. "Anna, dear, you're so punctual. Can you help me in the kitchen? Your sister is running just a bit late." Of course she was. I went to the kitchen, chopped vegetables, set the table, played my role, and 90 minutes after the planned dinner time, Vicky finally arrived. She looked radiant. Her hair had been freshly highlighted, expensive blonde that caught the light. She wore a white silk blouse and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Diamond studs in her ears. Perfume that smelled like money and narcissism. Sorry, she breezed, kissing our father's cheek. You know how Georgetown traffic is. Absolutely insane. We sat down to dinner. Vicky dominated the conversation. As always, talking about her latest trip to Miami, the penthouse renovation plans, her thoughts on hiring a personal stylist. My parents hung on every word, asking questions, offering suggestions, treating her like a celebrity, gracing them with her presence. I ate my pot roast. I sipped my wine. I waited. Because I knew Vicky. I knew that her arrogance always, eventually, made her overplay her hand. It happened during dessert. My mother had made her famous chocolate cake, the one she only made for special occasions. As she cut slices, Vicky raised her wine glass. Her cheeks flushed from the bottle and a half she'd already consumed. I want to make a toast, she announced, her words slightly slurred. To family, to success, and to knowing how to use your resources. She looked directly at me, her smile sharp. Anna, I have to tell you something. It's too funny not to share. My hand tightened on my water glass. The recording device in my pocket was running. I kept my face neutral. What's that? Vicky, she giggled, the sound grating. I used your credit to take out a $90,000 personal loan a few weeks ago. Your credit score wasn't good enough. But mine is perfect now. You should thank me. Really. I'm building your credit history. The room went silent. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face turned red. But not with anger. With embarrassment. With the desperate scramble to figure out how to minimize this. To explain it away. I set down my water glass carefully. My voice was calm. Professional. The voice I used when interrogating suspects. That's bank fraud. Vicky. A federal crime. You falsely represented yourself as me to obtain funds from a federally insured financial institution. That's a felony with a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison and $1 million fine. And since the funds were transferred electronically, that's also wire fraud. And obviously identity theft. Did you use the money for the down payment on your penthouse? Vicky's smile faltered. But her arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Oh my God. Annie. Relax. Who's going to know? Who's going to care? You're not actually going to report this to your government friends. Are you? Think about how embarrassing that would be. Your own sister having to borrow your credit because you never use it anyway. What would they think? My mother jumped in. Her voice, taking on that placating tone she'd used my entire life when Vicky crossed a line. Anna. Honey. I'm sure we can work this out within the family. Vicky didn't mean any harm. She just got a bit ahead of herself. My father nodded vigorously. That's right. We'll help her pay you back. Monthly installments. We'll figure it out. No need to get authorities involved. Family should handle family matters privately. I stood up slowly. I looked at my father, then my mother, then finally at Vicky, who was starting to look uncertain for the first time in her life. Every word you just said was recorded, I told Vicky. Every timestamp is documented. That was a full confession. I'm not Annie, your boring little sister who will let you walk all over her. I'm Senior Special Agent Alexandra Vance, FBI Financial Crimes Division. And you just confessed to multiple federal felonies on a recording that will be admissible in any federal court in this country. I picked up my jacket. I'm leaving now. I'm going directly to my office to file the official report that will trigger a formal investigation. Vicky, you should hire a lawyer. A very good one. Because the evidence I've gathered over the past 2 weeks, combined with your confession tonight, is more than enough for a grand jury indictment. I turned to my parents. And you should know that Vicky didn't just steal from me. I've identified at least 7 other victims over the past 4 years. The total fraud amount is over $400,000. This isn't a family matter. This is a federal criminal investigation. My mother's face had gone white. Anna, you can't be serious. She's your sister. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but the cold clarity of someone who'd finally stopped setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. She stopped being my sister the moment she decided I was a resource to exploit rather than a person to respect. I'll see you in court. I walked out. I got in my car. I drove to the Hoover Building through the dark streets of Washington, the city lights reflecting off the Potomac like scattered diamonds. I went to my office, logged into the secure system, and officially opened the investigation. Then I called Mike Sterling. The subject just confessed on tape. I need you to assemble a team. We're going to need search warrants for her residence, her vehicles, her financial accounts, and her electronic devices. We need to move fast before she has a chance to destroy evidence. Mike's voice was alert despite the late hour. Jesus. Alex. Okay. I'll have the warrants drafted by morning. Who's the subject? I took a breath. Victoria Melissa Vance. My sister. There was a long silence. Your sister, Alex. You should have told me. I needed you to evaluate the evidence objectively. Would you have done anything differently if you'd known? Another pause. No. The evidence is overwhelming. But Alex, this is going to be hard. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about 32 years of being invisible. 32 years of watching someone I loved become someone I couldn't respect. 32 years of enabling bad behavior by staying silent. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next 3 months were a blur of activity. The search warrants were executed at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't present because of the conflict of interest, but Mike gave me updates. They found evidence of all 7 victims I'd identified, plus 3 more I hadn't known about. Credit card statements, loan documents, forged signatures. Vicky had kept records of everything, probably because she'd never imagined facing consequences. They seized her laptop, her phone, her tablets. The digital forensics team found the loan application she'd submitted in my name, complete with draft versions showing how she'd practiced forging my signature. They found messages to friends bragging about her clever schemes. They found searches for how to open credit cards in someone else's name, how to avoid detection for identity theft, how to hide assets from creditors. She'd been sloppy because she'd never believed anyone would hold her accountable. Even after I warned her, she'd spent 2 days frantically trying to cover her tracks, deleting messages and moving money. But she didn't understand that deleted doesn't mean gone. Not when FBI, digital forensics experts are involved. The grand jury indicted her on 15 counts, 7 counts of identity theft, 5 counts of bank fraud, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of making false statements to a financial institution. Each count carried potential prison time. Combined, the maximum sentence was over 40 years. My parents hired an expensive lawyer, a slick Georgetown attorney who specialized in white-collar crime. He tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that Vicky was a first-time offender from a good family who'd made mistakes but deserved a second chance. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Catherine Walsh, who'd built her career on refusing to show mercy to privileged defendants, laughed in his face. Your client isn't a first-time offender. She's a repeat offender who's been getting away with fraud for years because she was good at choosing victims who wouldn't fight back. She's a predator. And this time, she chose the wrong target. Take it to trial, or take the deal I'm offering. 20 counts. Recommended sentence of 9 years. Full restitution to all victims. That's my final offer. The lawyer tried to get me to intervene, to ask the prosecutor to be lenient. He called me, left messages, sent emails. Agent Vance. Surely you don't want to see your own sister go to prison. Surely there's room for mercy here. Family is forever. I didn't respond. Because family isn't forever. Trust is conditional. Love requires respect. And Vicky had destroyed all of those things the moment she decided I was worth less than $90,000 of unearned luxury. My parents tried too. They showed up at my apartment at midnight. My father's face haggard. My mother's eyes red from crying. Please, Anna. My father begged. She's your sister. She's made mistakes. But she doesn't deserve to have her life ruined. Can't you talk to them, tell them it was a misunderstanding? I stood in my doorway, still in my work clothes, exhausted from a 14-hour day. She didn't make mistakes. She committed crimes, repeatedly, against multiple people, for years. If her name was anything other than Vance, if her last name was Rodriguez or Chen or Washington, you'd both be saying she deserved whatever punishment she got. But because she's your golden child, you want me to compromise my integrity, to corrupt a federal investigation, to let a criminal walk free. My mother clutched at my arm. What did we do wrong? We gave you everything. We raised you right. How did you become so cold? I looked at her hand on my arm, remembered all the times she'd touched Vicky with love and pride, all the times she'd touched me with absent-minded duty. I gently removed her hand. You didn't give me everything. You gave me the scraps left over after Vicky took what she wanted. You gave me the message that my value was in being useful, being quiet, being the responsible one who cleaned up messes without making a fuss. And you raised me to believe that was enough, that I should be grateful for being invisible. I stepped back into my apartment. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm an FBI agent who stopped a criminal. That's all this is. I'm doing my job. Good night. I closed the door. I heard my mother crying in the hallway. I heard my father's voice, angry and desperate, saying things about ungrateful children and ruined families. I stood with my back against the door until their voices faded, until I heard the elevator ding, until I was alone in the silence. And then I cried. Not for Vicky, not for my parents, but for the little girl in the birthday photo, the one watching her sister blow out her candles, learning that her role was to step aside, to make room, to settle for less. I cried for all the years I'd believed that being good enough meant being invisible enough. I cried because I was finally free of that lie. The trial was set for October. Vicky's lawyer tried every delay tactic in the book. But Judge Patricia Hendricks was not patient with obvious stalling. This trial will proceed as scheduled. The defendant has had ample time to prepare. Any further motions for delay will be denied. I sat in the courtroom during jury selection, 3 rows behind the prosecution table. I'd been excused from direct participation in the trial because of the conflict of interest. But I had every right to be there as a victim and a citizen. Vicky was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her lawyer had tried to get her released on bail, but Judge Hendricks had denied it after the prosecution showed evidence that Vicky had attempted to flee to Mexico the day before her arrest. She looked smaller in prison clothes. Her hair had grown out, the expensive highlights fading to reveal mousy brown roots. Without professional makeup, her face looked tired, older than 35. She scanned the courtroom and her eyes landed on me. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something real in her expression. Fear, regret, maybe even a flash of understanding that she'd destroyed her life for nothing. But then her lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her, and the mask came back up. Defiance, entitlement, the certainty that somehow, even now, she'd find a way to escape consequences. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution was methodical, building their case brick by brick. They brought in witnesses from Atlantic Bank who testified about the loan application, about the forged signatures, about the income verification that should have raised red flags, but didn't because the forger had been clever enough to use plausible numbers. They brought in the other victims. A woman named Jennifer, who'd been Vicky's roommate in college, who discovered $10,000 in credit card debt in her name after Vicky moved out. A man named David who dated Vicky for 6 months and loaned her $20,000 for a boutique she claimed to be opening. Money he never saw again. An older woman named Patricia, a friend of our mother's, who'd co-signed a car loan for Vicky only to be stuck paying it when Vicky defaulted. Each one told their story. Each one described how Vicky had made them feel special, chosen, important. How she'd cried and apologized when the debts came due. How she'd promised to pay them back. How she'd made them feel guilty for even bringing it up. How they'd stayed silent because they didn't want to ruin her life over money, because family and friends should forgive, because surely it was just a mistake. The prosecutor was brilliant. Catherine Walsh let each witness speak at length. Let the jury see the pattern. Then she'd ask one simple question: did the defendant ever pay you back? Every answer was the same. No. The defense tried to paint Vicky as a troubled woman who'd made poor choices but wasn't a hardened criminal. They brought in a psychologist who testified about impulse control disorders and the difficulty of growing up in a high-achieving family. They had character witnesses who described Vicky as generous and kind, someone who'd helped them during difficult times. But Catherine Walsh shredded that narrative on cross-examination. She showed that every act of generosity had been funded by fraud. The friend whose rent Vicky had helped pay, that money came from a credit card opened in Patricia's name. The charity donations Vicky bragged about, funded by the loan she took out using my identity. Even her kindness was theft. Just one step removed. On day 3, the prosecution played the recording from Easter dinner. The courtroom was silent as Vicky's voice filled the space, drunk and confident and utterly damning. I used your credit to take out a $90,000 personal loan. Your credit score wasn't good enough, but mine is perfect now. You should thank me. Really? I'm building your credit history. The jury's faces changed. Whatever sympathy, some of them might have felt evaporated as they heard Vicky brag about committing a federal crime against her own sister. The arrogance in her voice, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of remorse, until she realized she'd been caught. Catherine Walsh let the recording end. She turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you just heard the defendant confess? Not under interrogation, not under pressure, but casually, over dinner, to her own family, because she believed she would never face consequences, because she believed her sister would be too weak, too conflict-averse, too desperate for family approval to hold her accountable. She walked back to her table. The defendant was wrong. The closing arguments were powerful on both sides. The defense painted Vicky as a cautionary tale about mental health and family dysfunction. Someone who needed treatment, not prison. The prosecution painted her as a calculating predator who'd spent years honing her craft, choosing victims carefully, destroying lives systematically. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they filed back in, none of them looked at Vicky. I knew what that meant. I'd sat through enough trials to recognize a guilty verdict before it was announced. The foreperson stood. She was a woman in her 50s, a high school teacher, someone who'd spent her life working with young people trying to teach them right from wrong. On count 1, identity theft. How do you find the defendant? Guilty. On count 2, Bankfraud. How do you find the defendant? Guilty. 15 times. The same answer. Guilty. 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 Each word hammered another nail into the coffin of Vicky's old life. The life built on lies and theft and the exploitation of people who loved her. Vicky's lawyer put his hand on her shoulder. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that charisma and manipulation couldn't save her now. That being beautiful and charming didn't matter when the evidence was overwhelming and the jury had seen through every deception. My mother sobbed in the row behind me. My father sat rigid, his face gray. I felt nothing but a deep, settled calm. This was justice. This was what happened when someone finally said no to Vicky. When someone finally made her face the consequences of her choices. Sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. The prosecution recommended 9 years in federal prison. Full restitution to all 10 victims, totaling $410,000, and a prohibition from working in any financial institution for 10 years after her release. The defense asked for leniency, for probation, for house arrest, for anything but prison. Judge Hendricks looked at Vicky over her glasses. She'd been a federal judge for 23 years. She'd sentenced murderers and drug dealers and corrupt politicians. She didn't suffer fools or show mercy to the unrepentant. Ms. Vance, I've reviewed your case carefully. I've read the pre-sentencing report. I've considered your lack of prior criminal record and the letters submitted on your behalf by family and friends. I've also considered something else. The complete and total lack of remorse you've shown throughout this process. She paused. Even now, in your allocution statement, you focused on how this has affected you. Your suffering, your damaged reputation, your lost opportunities. Not once did you meaningfully acknowledge the pain you've caused your victims. Not once did you take real responsibility. You apologized for getting caught, not for what you did. Vicky tried to speak. The judge held up her hand. I'm not finished. You spent years preying on people who trusted you. You exploited family members, friends, acquaintances. You showed a systematic pattern of calculated fraud. And when your own sister, a federal law enforcement agent, discovered your crimes, you bragged about it. You thought you were untouchable. Judge Hendricks looked down at her notes. The court sentences you to 9 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will make full restitution of $410,000 to your victims. With a payment plan to be determined by the court, you are prohibited from opening any line of credit or making any purchase over $500 without approval from your probation officer for the duration of your supervised release. You are prohibited from employment in any financial institution or position of financial trust for 10 years following your release. The gavel came down. The sound echoed in the courtroom like a door slamming shut on Vicky's old life. She was led away by federal marshals. Still crying. Looking back at our parents with desperate eyes, waiting for them to save her one more time. But there was no saving her now. She'd built her entire life on a foundation of fraud, and it had finally collapsed, burying her under the weight of her own choices. I walked out of the courthouse into the autumn sunshine. The leaves on the trees lining Constitution Avenue were turning gold and crimson. The air was crisp, clear, carrying the promise of change. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the sun warm my face. My phone rang. Michael Sterling. Alex. You okay? Yeah. Mike. I'm okay. That was a hell of a thing. Your own sister. She stopped being my sister a long time ago. Today was just making it official. He was quiet for a moment. Listen, Director Reed wants to see you. When you're ready. I drove to the Hoover building. Eleanor Reed was waiting in her office. A corner space, with windows overlooking Pennsylvania Avenue. She was in her early 60s. A woman who'd spent 40 years in federal law enforcement and risen to lead one of the most prestigious divisions in the FBI. She gestured to a chair. Sit. Coffee, please. She poured 2 cups from an old-fashioned percolator she kept on a credenza. Real coffee. Strong and black. None of the fancy-flavored nonsense from the break room. She handed me a cup and sat across from me. Not behind her desk. Equals. At least for this conversation. That was an impossible situation you handled with exemplary professionalism. I read the case file. I watched how you built the investigation. You did everything by the book, even though it would have been easier to look the other way, especially because it was family. It was the right thing to do. It was. But right doesn't mean easy. She sipped her coffee. How are your parents handling it? They're not. They blame me. They think I destroyed Vicky's life out of spite. And they're wrong. Vicky destroyed her own life. I just stopped letting her destroy mine too. Reed nodded slowly. I'm promoting you. Effective immediately. You're the lead investigator for the new National Fraud Task Force. You'll be coordinating with field offices across the country, developing strategies to combat identity theft and financial fraud, training agents on best practices. It's a significant increase in responsibility and authority. I set down my coffee cup. Ma'am, I appreciate this, but I don't want a promotion because I turned in my sister. That's not why you're getting it. Reed's voice was sharp. You're getting it because you spent 2 weeks building an airtight case against someone you loved while maintaining your other caseload without a single dropped ball. You're getting it because you identified a pattern of fraud that led to 10 victims getting justice when they thought they never would. You're getting it because you showed me that you can make the hard call even when every emotion in your body is screaming at you to protect family. That's the kind of agent I need leading a task force. She stood up. Take the weekend. Think about it. But Alex, you should know something. The hardest thing about this job isn't catching criminals. It's living with yourself afterward when the criminals are people you used to love. If you can do that and stay professional, stay ethical, stay human, you're rare. And I need rare. I took the weekend. I drove to the Eastern Shore, rented a small cabin overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. I walked along empty beaches, watched the sun set over the water, let the salt air clear my head. I thought about Vicky, about who she'd been and who she'd become. I thought about my parents, about whether we'd ever have a relationship again, or if that bridge had burned beyond repair. I thought about the 7 years I'd spent at the FBI, the cases I'd worked, the people I'd helped, and I realized something. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn approval from people who would never give it. I'd spent 32 years being invisible because being seen meant being compared to Vicky and found wanting, but I'd never wanted what Vicky wanted. I didn't need expensive cars or designer clothes or Instagram followers. I didn't need to be the center of attention. I needed to matter. To do work that meant something. To look at myself in the mirror and see someone who stood for something real. And for the first time in my life, I did. On Monday, I went back to Reed's office. "I'll take the position." She smiled, a rare expression that made her look younger. "Good. Your first task force meeting is Friday. We've got field offices from New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami attending. You'll be briefing them on the Vance case, using it as a template for identifying and prosecuting systematic fraud operations." The Vance case? Is that what we're calling it? That's what it is. It's already being used in training at Quantico. An example of how to build a financial crimes case with ironclad evidence. Your sister's going to be infamous in FBI circles, just not the way she imagined. I nodded. There was a certain justice in that. Vicky had always wanted to be famous, to be talked about, to be someone people noticed. Now she would be, but as a cautionary tale, a warning about arrogance and entitlement and the consequences of believing you're too charming to fail. The next 6 months were intense. I assembled a team of 12 agents, specialists in different aspects of financial fraud. We developed protocols for cross-jurisdictional investigations. We created a database to track patterns of identity theft and fraud across state lines. We trained field agents on new detection methods and evidence-gathering techniques, and we got results. In the first 6 months, the task force opened 47 investigations. We identified 3 major fraud rings operating across multiple states. We recovered over $8 million for victims. We put 32 criminals in federal prison. I worked 80-hour weeks, lived on coffee and takeout, rarely saw my apartment in Alexandria except to sleep and shower. But I loved it. For the first time in my life, I was doing exactly what I was meant to do, using every skill I had to make a real difference. My parents tried to reach out a few times. My mother sent emails asking if we could talk, if I could help them understand how to file the credit fraud reports to repair their own credit that Vicky had damaged. My father left voicemails asking for advice on helping Vicky prepare for her appeal, even though I'd told him I couldn't and wouldn't be involved. Eventually, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Bethesda on a Saturday afternoon. They looked older. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother had lost weight, her face drawn and tired. We sat at a corner table. The conversation was stilted, awkward, full of long silences where nobody knew what to say. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Anna, we need your help with some paperwork. The credit fraud reports, the victim restitution forms. Your mother and we don't understand all the legal language." I looked at him. "I can help you with that. I'll walk you through the forms, help you gather the documentation you need." My mother reached across the table. "And Vicky's appeal, can you help with that too? Maybe talk to someone. Explain that she's not really a bad person. She just made mistakes." I pulled my hand back. "No, I can't and won't do that. Vicky was convicted on overwhelming evidence after a fair trial. There's no basis for an appeal beyond standard procedural review. And even if there was, I have a conflict of interest. I can't advocate for someone I helped convict." "She's your sister," my mother whispered. "She was my sister. She chose to stop being that the moment she decided I was worth less than $90,000. I've accepted that. You should too." My father's jaw tightened. "How can you be so cold after everything we did for you, everything we gave you? You turn your back on your family when we need you most." And there it was. The same refrain I'd heard my entire life. After everything we did for you, as if love was a transaction, as if being born into their family meant I owed them unconditional support, no matter what anyone did. I stood up. I'm not turning my back. I'm standing up straight for the first time in my life. I'll help you with the paperwork because you're victims of Vicky's fraud just like I am. But I'm not going to pretend she's anything other than what she is. A criminal who spent years hurting people and got caught. I pulled out my business card, wrote my personal cell number on the back. "Call me when you're ready to fill out the forms. I'll come over and help. But if you want me to help Vicky, to minimize what she did, to make excuses, I can't do that. I won't." I left the coffee shop. I didn't look back. It hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt. The kind that comes from setting a broken bone correctly, so it can heal properly. Over the next few months, I did help my parents with the paperwork. I went to their house, sat at their dining room table, walked them through form after form. We didn't talk about Vicky, except in the context of documenting her crimes. We didn't talk about family or forgiveness or moving forward. We just focused on the practical work of repairing the financial damage. Slowly, tentatively, something new emerged. Not the relationship we'd had before. That was gone forever. But something different. A relationship built on honesty instead of illusion. My father started asking about my work, actually listening when I explained cases I was working on. My mother stopped comparing me to Vicky. Stopped making subtle digs about my clothes or my apartment or my lack of social media presence. We would never be close. Too much had happened. Too many years of damage. But we could be civil. We could be honest. We could occupy the same room without anyone pretending to be something they weren't. That was enough. Sometimes enough is all you get. And learning to accept that is its own form of freedom. A year after Vicky's sentencing, I was called to testify before a Senate committee investigating identity theft and financial fraud. They wanted to hear about the task force's work, about the patterns we were seeing, about legislative changes that could help law enforcement combat these crimes more effectively. I sat at a table facing rows of senators. Cameras everywhere. My testimony being live-streamed and recorded for congressional records. I wore my best suit. Navy blue. Professional. I'd prepared my testimony carefully, working with the FBI's Legislative Affairs Office to ensure I didn't overstep my authority. Senator Patricia Morrison from California, chair of the committee, asked the question I'd been waiting for. Agent Vance, you've mentioned that victims of identity theft often know their attackers. Can you speak more to that? I leaned forward to the microphone. Senator, approximately 60% of identity theft cases involve someone known to the victim, family members, friends, roommates, romantic partners. These cases are particularly difficult because victims often don't want to report the crime. They feel guilty. They worry about damaging relationships. They convince themselves it's not that serious. And what do you say to those victims? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I say that love without respect isn't love. Trust without honesty isn't trust. Family shouldn't mean accepting abuse or exploitation. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the person hurting you, is to hold them accountable. Not out of revenge, but out of a belief that people deserve to face the consequences of their choices. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we become better. Senator Morrison nodded. Thank you, Agent Vance. That's powerful testimony. After the hearing, reporters wanted to interview me. I declined most of them. But I agreed to talk to one journalist from the Washington Post who'd been covering financial crimes for 20 years. We met at a quiet restaurant in Georgetown, ironically just a few blocks from Vicky's now-seized penthouse. The journalist, a woman named Sarah Chen, was direct. You testified about family members committing identity theft. Was that personal for you? It was. My sister committed identity theft against me. I investigated the case. She was convicted, and she's currently serving a federal prison sentence. Sarah's eyebrows rose. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was the easiest decision I've ever made. Once I knew what she'd done, there was never any question about what I had to do. Your parents must have been devastated. They were. They still are. But they're also coming to terms with the fact that protecting someone from consequences isn't the same as loving them. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sarah wrote notes on her tablet. Do you have any regrets? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No. I regret that my sister chose to commit crimes. I regret that my parents enabled her for so long. I regret the years I spent trying to earn approval that was never going to come. But I don't regret holding her accountable. That was justice, not revenge. And I can live with justice. The article ran a week later with the headline, "The FBI Agent Who Convicted Her Own Sister Inside the War on Financial Fraud." It went viral, shared thousands of times on social media. Some people called me a hero. Others called me heartless. I ignored both extremes and focused on my work, because that's what mattered. Not what strangers thought, not whether I was praised or criticized, but whether I was doing the job I'd been hired to do, protecting people, stopping criminals, making sure that charm and manipulation and family connections didn't put someone above the law. 2 years into her sentence, Vicky requested to speak with me. The prison liaison called my office. She's asking if you'll visit. You're under no obligation, but she's requested you specifically. I thought about it for a week. Mike Sterling told me I was crazy to consider it. What could she possibly say that you'd want to hear? Maybe nothing. But maybe I need to see her, to remind myself why I did what I did. I drove to the Federal Correctional Institution in West Virginia on a gray Saturday in November. The facility was medium security, all concrete and razor wire, and the oppressive sense of freedom suspended. I went through security, surrendered my weapon and badge, sat in a visiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Vicky was brought in wearing khaki prison uniform, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked smaller, younger, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. We sat across from each other at a metal table, a corrections officer watching from the corner. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Vicky said, "Thank you for coming. Why did you want to see me?" She looked down at her hands. "I'm in therapy here. Court mandated. The psychologist keeps asking me to take accountability, to really understand what I did and why. And do you? I'm starting to." She looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw something genuine in her eyes. Not manipulation, not performance, but actual pain. I spent my whole life believing I deserved things just because I wanted them, that the rules didn't apply to me because I was special, and nobody ever told me different. Not Mom, not Dad, not anyone. I told you different. Multiple times. You just didn't listen. Because you were boring Anna. Safe Anna. The one who followed rules and never took risks. Why would I listen to you? She shook her head. I didn't see you. I didn't see that you were strong, that you had integrity, that you were building something real. While I was building a house of cards, I saw what I wanted to see. A doormat. Someone I could use. And now I see you clearly. And I'm so ashamed I can't breathe sometimes. Her voice cracked. You were my sister. You would have helped me if I'd just asked. If I'd been honest about struggling, about needing money, about feeling lost. But I couldn't admit weakness. I couldn't admit that my perfect life was a lie. So I took from you instead. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, of performance. But I saw only exhaustion, and something that might actually be genuine remorse. I'm not here to forgive you. Vicky, I'm not here to make you feel better or to say it's okay. It's not okay. What you did was cruel and criminal, and it damaged more than just me. I know. She wiped her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just telling you that I finally understand. You weren't the weak one. I was. I was so weak I could only feel strong by tearing other people down, by taking what wasn't mine, by building myself up with stolen things. She looked at me directly. You're the strongest person I've ever known. And I'm so sorry I didn't realize it until you destroyed my entire life. I felt something crack open in my chest. Some tiny space where anger had been living rent-free for 2 years. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the beginning of letting go. You destroyed your own life. Vicky, I just stopped enabling you. I know. She stood up. The guard moved forward, ready to escort her back. Can I ask you something? What? Are you happy without us? Without Mom and Dad and me? Without the family? Are you happy? I thought about my work, about the cases I'd solved, the people I'd helped. I thought about my apartment, small and modest, but mine. I thought about the respect I'd earned from colleagues, the reputation I'd built on competence and integrity. I thought about sleeping soundly every night, no longer wondering when the next betrayal would come. Yeah. Vicky, for the first time in my life, I am. She nodded slowly. Good. That's good. She turned to leave. then looked back one more time. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. I watched her walk away, back to her cell, back to the consequences of her choices, and I realized that was probably the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I didn't visit again. We exchanged a few letters over the next year, brief and awkward but not hostile. She told me about her classes, about learning to code, about planning for a life after prison that would be humble and honest and nothing like the fantasy she'd lived before. I told her about the task force's successes, about a big case we'd closed, about buying a small house in Arlington with a garden where I was learning to grow tomatoes. We would never be close. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. But maybe, eventually, we could be something. Distant relatives who were honest with each other. People who shared DNA and history but not their lives. That was probably the best we could hope for. And I'd learned that accepting reality was more peaceful than chasing fantasy. My parents and I found a similar balance. We had dinner once every few months. Careful conversations about neutral topics. The kind of relationship you might have with friendly acquaintances. They'd stopped asking me to fix things with Vicky. Stopped trying to make me the villain in the story they'd constructed. They were slowly, painfully, learning to see both their daughters as we actually were rather than as they'd imagined us to be. It wasn't the family I'd dreamed of having, but it was honest, and honesty, I'd learned, was more valuable than harmony built on lies. 3 years after Vicky's conviction, I was promoted again, Deputy Director of Financial Crimes, overseeing multiple task forces, setting policy for the entire division. I had an office with windows overlooking the National Mall, a team of 40 agents, and a reputation as someone who couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be convinced to look the other way. On my first day in the new office, I found a package on my desk. Inside was a framed photo I'd never seen before. It showed me at my FBI graduation, in my dress uniform, my face serious and determined. My parents must have taken it, though they'd never mentioned it. There was a note in my mother's handwriting. We always knew you were strong. We just didn't understand what strength looked like. We're proud of you, Anna. We always should have been. I put the photo on my desk, facing me, not because I needed their validation anymore, but because it represented something important. The long, difficult journey from being invisible to being seen, from seeking approval to earning respect, from being a doormat to being a force. That night, I stood on my back porch, watching the sun set over my small garden. Tomato plants were thriving, heavy with red fruit. The grass needed mowing. The fence needed painting. All the normal, mundane tasks of a life that was entirely mine. Built on my choices, my work, my integrity. I thought about the question I get asked most often in interviews. Do you regret turning in your sister? Wasn't there another way? And my answer is always the same. There were other ways. I could have confronted her privately. I could have demanded she pay me back quietly. I could have let family loyalty override everything else. Those would have been easier choices in the short term, but they wouldn't have been right. They wouldn't have protected the other victims. They wouldn't have held Vicky accountable. They wouldn't have sent the message that no one, no matter how charming or how well connected, is above the law. And most importantly, they wouldn't have freed me, because staying silent, enabling bad behavior, protecting people from consequences, that's not love. It's cowardice dressed up as loyalty. And I was done being a coward. I was done being invisible. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be used. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the truth. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to stop trying to save everyone else. I'm Senior Deputy Director Alexandra Vance. I'm 40 years old. I lead one of the most effective financial crimes units in federal law enforcement. I own my own home. I sleep soundly every night. I look at myself in the mirror and I like what I see. And the cost of getting here was giving up a family that never really saw me. A sister who only valued me as a resource. And the fantasy that being good enough would ever be enough. It was worth every penny. The strongest move isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's simply doing your job with perfect integrity. And sometimes the greatest freedom isn't being seen by everyone. It's not needing to be seen at all. So I ask you, Have you ever stayed silent when speaking up would have cost you everything? Have you ever chosen loyalty over truth? Family over justice? Peace over principle? And if you did, do you regret it? Or are you still telling yourself that silence is the same as love? Drop a comment and let me know your story. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that accountability matters more than comfort. And like this video if you think it's time we stopped protecting people from the consequences of their own choices, because the truth is, we don't destroy people by holding them accountable. We destroy them by teaching them that charm and manipulation and being someone's favorite is more powerful than honesty and integrity and doing the right thing. I chose integrity, and I'd choose it again, every single time.